Wade, perhaps starting with you, there's a bunch of questions that have come through on Slido. You made reference in your presentation to livability being one of the key dimensions of the work that WMETA's looking at. And there are a number of questions in the Slido format that are asking about that balance between some of the positive and the less positive effects of development in the Western region, and how some of these development opportunities are seeking to strike an effective balance, particularly around some of the poorer, the potential for economic, environmental outcomes. As well as what opportunities there are for community-led and community input into the shape that these development opportunities are taking.
Yeah, look, I suppose our starting point in relation to livability is if you want to grow jobs in a local area and you want to have a diversity of jobs, you've also got to have places where people will want to work. And there needs to be a recognition that for all of us, there's things that we love about where we live, and there's things that frustrate the hell out of us because it's different to what we've seen elsewhere. So when we talk about livability, we're really talking about sort of urban design features, streetscapes, lovely green canopies in our neighbourhoods, open spaces. The environmental aspects that are so important. It was lovely to hear Emma talk about sort of the 7-star sort of energy rating on housing stock. It's about diversity of housing. It's not pushing it's about having a community where everyone feels welcome. That's really what we're talking about in terms of building livable suburbs. And where does that come from? It often comes from local government level, who are closest to the people, who are listening to the various groups, who are often doing a lot of voluntary work to improve the livability of their own community, and often looking for a supplementation by way of financial support to improve component parts of their community. So I suppose from WMETA's point of view, whilst we don't dig right down into sort of the street-by-street livability aspects right across the entire Western region, what we're really saying when we talk to 3 levels of government is the investments that you will make, the jobs that will grow in particular areas like Sunshine, there is component parts of our economic centres that we will look to, such as open space, streetscape, urban design, diversity of housing, transport connectivity, all of those things which give a vibrance about our local economic hubs, that people not only want to work there, they want to live there as well. So when we talk about livability, Jason, it's really in those very broad terms. We don't want communities to be dormant. We don't want communities to be good for some and not everyone. So it's really about bringing a recognition to those areas. I hope that sort of broadly answers the question. There is a section on livability in the report, the proposal, and I've given the website there that people can access and read about that if they want some more information.
Well, thank you, Wade. And perhaps just sticking with you for a minute, you talked a couple of times there about employment as well, and there was a question, somebody referenced your comments about people in the West often leaving the West for work. Have you also looked at the numbers of people who are coming into the West for work and where there's a mismatch between available skills and available positions?
Well, it's just such a brilliant question. We have looked at this, and again, if people want to have a look at our website and go to our 2017 report, we actually give some data sets. Some of the really big sort of gaps are that we have about 50,000 workers in Melbourne's West working in sort of professional services, sort of white-collar jobs, perhaps at the higher income level. We have a disproportionately low level of those jobs available in Melbourne's West. So again, it's not to call out one industry over another, because all industries are important in terms of the future growth, and social services and health and education are going to be some of the big areas of growth. But, you know, when we're talking about putting an airport rail link or suburban rail through Sunshine, suddenly private developers are wanting to come and talk about building offices for professional workers in Sunshine. And that's not to mean that Sunshine's suddenly going to change its face overnight, but it is about bringing a diversity of job opportunities so that when the next generation of people moving into the West or young people are being educated in the West are looking at their job options, they can actually have a greater choice than they've had to now. So it's really a recognition that we do have people in the West that are already working in particular areas, and professional services is one of those areas, but they're actually travelling out of Melbourne's West to get employment. We want to bring more of those jobs. In order to do that, we've got to attract employers to want to invest, and they're already looking very seriously at Sunshine in particular because the fact that there'll be a mass capacity to move people in and out of that economic precinct.
Great.
Thanks, Jason.
Thank you. And Emma, I wonder if you had comments to make in relation to the employment picture, particularly in Brimbank and the West. You touched a bit on the impacts of COVID, particularly for women and for younger people, and the fact that the state budget brought particular attention to young people from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds. What are your thoughts about the economic opportunities arising out of the budgets for Brimbank?
Oh, I would imagine, I suspect Wade and others on this call are probably already onto this actually, in terms of looking at where people have been particularly impacted. And we know in terms of looking at Brimbank, for example, when we look at the data in terms of unemployment and that sort of that local data, and also the data actually on poverty, and we've got our poverty maps online if anyone wanted to jump on those and have a look as well. It just shows where we need that really targeted support. And I think for me, one of the reasons we did the poverty maps going back a little while, it was to show the local characteristics of each area, and actually particularly looking at the importance of organisation or entities such as local government to say, well, there are some things that are systematic, such as Job Seeker and JobKeeper, etc. There are others that are local, and we need to understand the local characteristics of each area. When you jump onto the poverty maps, they're sort of interactive. There's other new, iterations that have come out actually with some more recent data as well. But it's about actually tailoring responses to the needs of communities. And I do think we've got this particular opportunity right now by virtue of things that are happening at a state and a federal level, but joining them up really tightly with that local need. So yeah, broad systemic issues, but also looking at actually what are some of the things that we need to do at a local level in terms of understanding the local need. And the data's there and it speaks for itself. And when you look at the work that everyone on this call is doing, I think that's going to be quite pointed in terms of some of the effects that need to or some of the action that needs to be taken from here as well.
Lovely, thank you. And you've touched on this in the chat in Zoom. One of the really important factors in setting up a good start to life in education and ultimately employment is access to early education. There was a question about access to 4-year-old kinder. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, Emma?
Yes, just to flag, the question was around 4-year-old kinder, and I think the certainty, which would be both for services, kinders, and also for families and guardians, etc. One of the challenges we've got in 4-year-old kinder is that the 15 hours of funded 4-year-old kinder is subject to a national partnership agreement, and it doesn't seem to matter which colour of politics is in at a state level. Trying to lock in that national partnership agreement often for longer than 12 months, let alone in advance, is an enormous challenge. So just to answer that question really directly, that's been a problem forever. And it brings a huge amount of pain actually when it comes to services who are trying to provide in advance around how do you give families the certainty, etc., that they need. It always seems to get there, but gee, sometimes it's been pretty damn late, and it makes it really hard for services that are planning around how they, the services that they'll provide going forward. So at the same time, I would call out the free kinder component because I think that's critically important. And the need, one of the things that strikes me, and I know the 3-year-old kinder is being rolled out in different areas, and I can't recall off the top of my head whether Brimbank is one for next year. But we know that high quality early childhood education just makes a transformational difference to a young person's life trajectory, whether it's about health, whether it's about their economic participation, etc. And one of the things that often gets focused on around early childhood education is, well, it's great because it lets primarily mums work. Yep, that's good. But actually, it's amazing for kids and their long-term trajectory. And I feel like that often gets overlooked, and the value of that is often overlooked. So slight extension in my answer, Jason, but it's something I think is so critically important.
Thank you, Emma. I'm so mindful of the time and wanting to provide a little bit of space for people to have a break before we delve in a little bit more detail into discussion in the topic areas. Perhaps to throw to both of you, we have a number of folks on the call who are local residents in the Brimbank area or are working in NGOs and other organisations servicing the Brimbank area. From each of your perspectives, what are the kind of lead opportunities for people to be engaging with what's come out of the state budget, really to improve experience and access for people in the Brimbank area? I know that's a tough question because there's so much there, but some really high impact opportunities that folks might engage with.
I might go first and give Emma the last word. It's terrific to be co-presenting with Emma today because they do such great work right across Victoria, and much of what we're seeing in the budget comes from the advocacy of VCOS. They always bring evidence to the table, so it's really lovely to be co-presenting with Emma. But I did want to say, look, think about an airport rail link as not just a stop in sunshine. It's a jobs corridor for 10 years. It's really hard to get $10 billion worth of project actually happening. And once upon a time, $10 billion for infrastructure used to be the totality of the budget in terms of all of its infrastructure. Think about that airport rail link as a jobs corridor that's coming through Melbourne's west. And then think about the fact that the Victorian government now has a requirement that anyone who wants to build that airport rail link must provide a procurement plan in terms of its delivery, which delivers social impact. There's a great project that I've looked at over in the UK. It was an upgrade of a sewer line, not a particularly attractive project, I know, in London, over 25 kilometres. And part of the legacy of that project was that workers were drawn from the postcodes in which that sewer line ran, and it ran through some pretty disadvantaged areas. I think there's a wonderful opportunity through Brimbank's leadership, WIMEDA, and I know VCOS supports the social procurement aspects of the Victorian government, to look at a jobs corridor project like Airport Rail Link. Yes, it will create opportunities for Sunshine and Brimbank, but why not think about it as having some requirements about drawing opportunities out for workers who are looking for work, not just in Brimbank, but across Melbourne's west. I think that's a really great centrepiece, which is can be extended into areas such as the one that Emma talked about in terms of social housing. There's so much in this budget, as Emma said, that there's so much work still to do to resolve how the budget will actually roll out, that one of the things we've got to keep in our mind is how does the West always be front and centre in the conversations to accelerate the opportunities in Melbourne's West. And that's where the advocacy of all of you involved in this discussion, and Brimbank and Lead West and other organisations such as WIMEDA, will be really important to make sure that none of this investment is delayed in any way, because it's been a long time coming, and I'm sure Emma will agree with that.
Thank you, Wade. And as you talked about, Emma, it's barely 5 or 6 months until we have the next round of budgets to come too. So your thoughts?
Thank you. And thank you, Wade, for your incredibly kind words. And I have to say kudos to Wade for everything he did, particularly as a minister, to make, actually in the leading work to make this happen as well. And to everyone on this call, because Wade's point around that traditional underinvestment in the West, it's profound. And this is our chance to actually redress some of that imbalance. The other thing that I would so 2 things I'd want to call out. One is around some of that, sort of that community ecosystem there, where I think there's enormous opportunity where there's investment, be it in public libraries or parks, those sorts of things that we know they're kind of the knitting that often hold the communities together. So just to add that in addition to the points that Wade made. And the other thing that we're really calling for looking forward is a wellbeing budget, because really, if you've got, well, actually, I know this has just changed, but we've always sort of said, you can have a AAA credit rating, but if you've got a AAA credit rating and 100,000 people who are on a waiting list for a house, what does that mean about your society? So for me, I'm pretty keen to look at actually if you look at each sort of slice of government that often operates in silos, for them to be reporting back against, you know, how are they delivering to the well-being of every Victorian and every Victorian community. I think that's really important, and we're having some pretty good conversations about that now. And I think it would be great to join with everyone on this call to kind of say, well, actually, how do we deliver for well-being for everyone who is in the Brimbank, the broader West and North communities? How do we deliver? So if, for example, if we're looking at an infrastructure project, how does that deliver towards well-being, and having governments report, you know, accordingly, as they do in New Zealand, and looking at what happens in Scotland and Iceland and other areas. I just think we've got this real moment, ironically, that's come through a pandemic and come through enormous hardship. How do we take that and actually, to be candid, I think it's created opportunities we would not have had otherwise.
Right, right. And there's a great silver lining to an otherwise dreadful experience, and highlighting not a particularly new experience either. That's been long-running equity issues. So much richness in that discussion. We could continue talking for hours, but some really valuable insights from both of you to set us up for the next phase of our discussion today. If everyone can join me in virtually thanking Emma and Wade, both of you, for your contribution today. That's been really super exceptional and helpful. Thank you very much for your time, and both have a very lovely afternoon.